Hi everybody, and welcome to episode 11 of Rant Radio Live. We are broadcasting live tonight from New York. We are back on the island, and we just recently made our way on the Occupy bus tour. And tonight's episode is going to be focusing on America and specifically how we are in fact the terrorists. And this is definitely a sore subject for a lot of people. There has been a lot of speculation over the years as to who the real terrorists are, and tonight I'm going to attempt to debunk the myth and the mystery behind this phantom enemy that we have been fighting for over a decade. So to start out things, I am going to read a quick definition of terrorism, and this is the definition that is taken from Merriam-Webster's Dictionary Online. The short-term definition states that terrorism is the systematic use of terror specifically as a means of coercion. And the longer definition goes in to say, this is the systematic use of violence to create a general climate of fear in a population and thereby to bring about a particular political objective. And although it's usually thought of as a means of destabilizing or overthrowing existing political institutions, terror has also been employed by governments against their own people to suppress dissent. And the examples that they give in the dictionary definition include the Roman Empire, the French Revolution, Nazi Germany, and Stalin's rule, among a few others. The U.S. didn't make the list. They do, however, cite the most horrific act of terrorism was September 11th. And while I'm not going to get into my views about whether or not I think 9/11 was an inside job, there are plenty of documentaries already out there that explain that in full. What I am going to talk about a little bit more is the background about Osama bin Laden and what some may not know about the man that was cloaked in mystery and basically turned into America's biggest villain. Now, while he is no longer alive, I don't think the mystery died with him. I think that it goes on, and there are more and more questions that people are asking as to who this man really was, what he stood for, and why we waged a war for so long against not only this individual, but an apparent sleeper cell network that extended through over 60 countries around the world. So first, now that we understand the technical definition of terrorism, I'm going to read a little excerpt of a speech that was given by an Iraqi war vet in 2009. His name is Mike Prisner. I'm not sure if I want to pronounce it as Prisner, but it is Mikeprysner. You can look up the entire speech that he gave on YouTube. There are several different videos of it, and it's really amazing stuff. So basically, he was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division when he first joined the Army, and then in March 2003, he was attached to the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and that was deployed to northern Iraq. So this is what he had to say about his experience. We were told we were fighting terrorists, but the real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon deployed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While all of these weapons are created and owned by the government, they are harmless without the people willing to use them. Those who send us to war do not have to pull the trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war. They merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way, and they need soldiers who are willing to kill or be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks in the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere in the earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight, and the ruling class, the billionaires who profit from human suffering, care only about expanding their wealth, controlling the world economy, understand that their power lies in the ability to convince us that war, oppression, and exploitation is in our best interest. They understand that their wealth is dependent on their ability to convince us, the working class, to die to control the market of another country. And convincing us to kill and die is based on their ability to make us think that we are somehow superior. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander $450 million a day on this occupation. Poor and working people in this country are sent to kill poor and working people in another country, to make the rich richer, and without racism, soldiers would realize that they have more in common with the Iraqi people than they do with the billionaires that send us to war. I threw families onto the street in Iraq, only to come home and find families thrown onto the street in this country in the tragic and unnecessary foreclosure crisis, only to wake up and realize that our real enemies are not in some distant land, but not people whose names we don't know and cultures we don't understand. The enemy is people we know very well and people we can identify. The enemy is a system that wages war when it's profitable. The enemy is the CEOs who lay off our jobs when it is profitable. It's the insurance companies who deny us health care when it is profitable. It's the banks who take away our homes when it is profitable. Our enemies are not 5,000 miles away. They are right here at home. If we organize and fight with our sisters and brothers, we can stop this war. We can stop the government, and we can create a better world. So those are the words of somebody who was there and did horrific things and did things that they weren't proud of. And he wasn't the only one that testified about his experience. But he is one of the few soldiers that does have the guts to say it out loud and to protest the government that he fought and almost died for. And that's what we are experiencing. We are experiencing soldiers who are waking up, who are becoming awake and aware of what they have done is not only terribly wrong, but that they did it for no good reason and to not make us any safer as a nation, and to only plunder and pillage and to cause more harm and damage to other nations who never wanted us there and who really don't need us there. And the idea of us trying to spread democracy is simply a fictitious, made-up concept. We do not only spread democracy and the idea in other nations, but we claim to have it at home, and both are completely inaccurate and at this point totally irrelevant, because what is happening here is an awakening and a hiring of consciousness, and unfortunately soldiers who are coming back traumatized and feeling alone and isolated are experiencing that betrayal, and they're experiencing the realization that they died for nothing, that they fought for nothing, and that their families have suffered for nothing. We went to these wars illegally, and we continue to create this theme of fear in this country, because the fact is we created a phantom enemy. We created something that doesn't exist in order to perpetuate our trajectory in creating more profit and bigger corporations and more control over a people that willingly give up their civil liberties when they feel it is in their best interest to keep them safe. So we're going to go into a little bit about how we got to this point and why that this is the role our government is taking. Why the need to create a new enemy, especially one that is made up almost out of thin air? Why the need to intervene and stick our noses in everybody else's business? We've got enough problems here at home. Don't you think we should be worrying about our own? We're so concerned with liberating other peoples, but we suppress the voices of our own in this country. It sounds backwards to me. And that's when it starts to unravel and the lies start coming out. And you'll never be able to believe anything the government tells you, because you know that where they are coming from is a place of deception and a place of manipulation. It's not based in fact. It's not in your best interest. It's not to keep you safe. It's to make you fearful enough to give up every last human right until you don't have a single gun to protect yourself and you don't have a single leg of the Constitution to stand on. So I want to talk a little bit about something called the Vietnam Syndrome, which I had never heard of before I started doing my research this week. And apparently what happened back in the 60s and 70s during the Vietnam War was there was such a public outrage towards this war. It was not a popular war, and a lot of people were very upset that we seemed to be doing something and dragging out a war unnecessarily. And soldiers were dying and coming back traumatized, and no one really saw what we were gaining from the occupation in Vietnam. So basically the Vietnam Syndrome was this idea that because of the public outrage and the wide public support to end the war, that we needed to be more careful who we intervened with and where we treaded on as far as foreign territory. But it was felt that at one point, according to President George W. Bush Sr., that we finally kicked the Vietnam Syndrome. As he said, he told the world after the Gulf War was fought to reverse the Iraqi annexation of Kuwait. His exact words were, "We finally have kicked the Vietnam Syndrome." So basically, he kicked off the use of military power around the world. I'm getting notes. Oh, cool. So it looks like after we are done with the material, we're going to have a guest who is going to join in and ask some questions. So please stay tuned to the end of the episode, where we are finally going to get Mr. Charlie on the live stream, and he's going to ask some questions. So that should be really fun. Our first official guest. We've been trying to get this man to speak on camera, so that should be really fun. So back to the Vietnam Syndrome. So basically, we know that the Iraq War was one of the worst foreign policy disasters in our history. It's very similar to Vietnam. There are a lot of parallels. So we had to figure out a way that we could continue to go to war with nations, but not have the same public outcry that we saw during the Vietnam War. So basically, all they did was try to manipulate and use the mass media to totally twist the facts and get our support. As if you don't have the public support, you're not going to have as many soldiers, and you're just not going to be as effective in having the kind of military regime that you want. So that was kind of the parallel that happened with the Iraq War. But even before that, the presidencies were trying to kick that syndrome and allow themselves full steam ahead, basically, to go and infiltrate and intervene wherever they felt they felt it appropriate. And right now we do have military bases all over the world. And for a nation that wants peace, we sure have a lot of people set up all over the world to keep peace, or to scare the living daylights out of everybody in the world. Because it's kind of the only point that I see to a giant military presence. And I'm going to get into more about all these different ways that America terrorizes, not just the world, but us. But it is important that we understand that this has been a long time coming, and we as a nation had to find a way to continue to profit over war. And if we didn't have any more enemies to fight, if we had conquered everyone there was to conquer, or everyone was at peace with each other, then companies like Halliburton and Raytheon would really have no reason to exist anymore, right? I mean, there would be no reason for the military-industrial complex at all. I mean, why have a giant army? There are plenty of countries that don't have giant armies like this, and they seem to do just fine. In fact, countries like Australia have a smaller army, and they have a lot more money to pour into the nation and benefit the actual communities, to actually support things like education and healthcare. But instead, the America perspective is squander all the taxpayer dollars on beefing up a giant military that is actually very unnecessary. So we create a phantom enemy. We create something new to fight that actually will have no end. And it enables us to continue arming people who are in on this war, and to continue to profit off of whatever fighting and destruction and violence that leads to. So it's really, really sick stuff. And your taxpayer dollars pay for this. That's the only way that the government's able to do this. They have to get the funding from you. So we only really have ourselves to blame. And I understand that after September 11th, we were all in a state of shock. We were all traumatized in our own way. And for those of us who lost people in the World Trade Center, it was even more difficult. But we have to get past that now. We have to stop living in fear. We have to stop thinking that terrorists are lurking around every corner and that giving up our civil liberties is somehow going to ensure that terrorists do not strike. That is simply not the case. And we have seen, especially in the last 2 years, with the emergence of the Occupy movement, that this is definitely not the case. Because when regular, everyday people decide to get together and discuss how this country has completely screwed us over, guess what they get labeled as? Terrorists. So I ask you the question, what makes the terrorists in this country, which could be me or you or anybody else who shares a URL that they deem offensive or endanger to national security, and the people wearing turbans in the desert? What's the difference? I don't see as big of a difference. The fact is, we don't have guns the way they use them in other nations. We are not as far along in our conflict. But I can guarantee in the next 20 years or so that we could see the kind of violence in this country that is happening around the world as a result of more austerity and the cutting off of resources and the outsourcing of jobs and the oppression of a government that is turning into a fascist dictatorship and not any kind of shedding of democracy that we claim to be trying to reach. It's just not happening. We're losing it layer by layer, amendment by amendment. It's disappearing, and it's really, really sick. So President George Bush Sr. was totally happy. They had kicked the Vietnam syndrome full speed ahead. One of the things I didn't know was that in the Iraqi war in particular, Japan actually aided us, and that is violating international law by assisting us in Iraq. Just a little fact I wanted to throw out there. So feel free to delve into that more because, basically, if you guys watched my UN episode, you know that everybody's violating international law everywhere. And that's basically why no one's getting put on trial, no one's going to jail. That's why George Bush sits comfortably on his ranch and doesn't have to give a damn about all the war crimes and genocide that happened under his administration. So basically, the U.S. fails to recognize, as displayed in Iraq and Afghanistan, that when they intervene, which means attack and occupy, in non-Western countries and start dividing, killing, and policing its people, popular resistance inevitably follows. This is the double-edged sword that the U.S. doesn't seem to realize it's wielding. On one hand, they think, okay, we've got to go in, we've got to infiltrate, we've got to snuff out these terrorists, and then we're just going to bomb and kill and torture and evict whoever comes in our path. The soldiers that were going into Iraq did not even know the difference. They don't know what a terrorist looks like. It could be anybody. And the fact is, when they're working with the Northern Alliance, which was a group out of Iraq that was basically helping us in aiding this process of just detaining people, arresting whoever, they were in on it and getting paid for anybody arrested. So soldiers are on this wild goose chase, going into a country that they have no familiarity with, know nothing about the people, and they are just going around and terrorizing the country. This is not helping the country fight terrorism. This is not helping us fight terrorism. All they're doing is breeding hatred. They're destroying and destabilizing communities, and they're leaving people homeless. They're leaving children familyless, and how can we live with ourselves knowing that this is what we're funding? And that's why soldiers come back traumatized. They end up committing suicide. They are never the same because they realize that what they're doing is not only horrific, but for no good reason whatsoever. It's one thing if you could have said that this war was fought and there was something good that came out of it. We're safer, we're more secure, we're more democratic. But the fact is we're being taken over by corporations. We're being foreclosed on. We're losing our food supply to Monsanto. We're losing all of our civil liberties. So nothing has changed. All it's done is get worse and worse and worse. And for me, it angers me to a point that I don't know how I can describe without coming off like an Alex Jones type or something. I don't want to get to that kind of level of anger. I really don't, because I know he turns a lot of people off. But he speaks truth. And I think that the most important thing about these rants is not to criticize how fast I speak or with what fervor I speak, but to really listen to what I'm saying. And it's that if you still believe that the war on terror is a legitimate war, you need to wake up. And you need to do your research, and you need to learn the truth. And the fact is there are enough CIA people coming out that used to work on these specific units. There are enough people who are coming forward that actually fought in the war, that are denouncing it and telling of the horrors that happened. So specifically, there's been an ex-CIA agent who's been very, very vocal about his experience, and he was on the Bin Laden unit specifically. So his name is Michael Scheurer, which is Scheuer. So Scheurer, I'm terrible with names. Anyway, he's all over the internet. You can totally look him up. And one of the things that he says, which I wanted to read to you, is, the truth is, American and Western foreign policy interests in the Middle East have depended for 50 years on the maintenance of tyranny. Tyranny that gave us access to oil, tyranny that protected Israel, and in the last 20 years, tyranny that persecuted Islamists to protect us. I mean, that pretty much sums it up in a nutshell. And I could continue to rant and rant and rant, but that's what it's about. This is not about spreading freedom. This is not about liberating nations. This is not about making us more safe in this country. And it's about just showing who the bigger head honcho is and trying to desperately hold on to our status as a superpower and desperately hold on to the natural resources that we're still relying on, because we don't make the transition to alternative energies. And we've been suppressing the alternative energy sources that have been around since Nikola Tesla talked about it, or all of the amazing inventors over the last century who have come forth with amazing alternatives, and the alternatives that are still trying to get out there today. But the fact is, no, we just want to continue to pillage this unsustainable resource that exists in the Middle East, in particular countries like Saudi Arabia. Not to mention what we're doing in our own country with the tar sands pipeline and the Spectra pipeline. You know, we are just making blunder after blunder, and the American public is okay with it. Because the American public thinks, oh, we're fighting terror, we're doing the right thing. And nobody seems to read between the lines. I mean, my God, in Afghanistan, before we invaded Afghanistan, militant groups had burned down all the opium fields that were in Afghanistan. After we invaded, guess how much of the percentage of opium production comes out of Afghanistan? Over 90%. That's after we invaded. Now, if you're trying to fight a war on drugs, how does that happen? The fact is, Afghanistan didn't want opium fields, and they tried to destroy them. But the America perspective is, oh, this is profitable. Because we've had people addicted to heroin for years. And we're not actually fighting any war on drugs. We're fighting a war with drugs. And we make so much money off of incarcerating entire families for being involved with drug cartels, which we're promoting and encouraging. So we have entire concentration camps dedicated just to that facet. And that is the kind of stuff that we're doing. You know, this is terrorism. You know, not only are they instilling fear in the American public to condone their terrorist acts in the Middle East, but they're terrorizing people in the country and imprisoning people in this country. And we just seem to turn a blind eye to all the examples that you can find of these concentration camps that have playgrounds with barbed wire around the playgrounds. What kind of child deserves to grow up in that kind of environment? But that's the way we do things in the U.S. And I'm ashamed to be a citizen of this nation. I am ashamed to have voted for President Obama in his first term. I am utterly ashamed that I didn't wake up sooner. But it's our job to continue to put our anger towards something good, and that's continuing the conversation. That's alerting people who don't understand, and to try so deliberately to chip away at the ignorance that allows people to just sit idly by while this stuff happens. So, what are some other ways that we are funding terrorism? Well, we can talk about Israel. Israel's a big one. So, Obama is in the news. He's in the news for a lot of things right now, but specifically, next week he plans on making his first visit to Israel. Now, Israel, of course, we know, is occupying Palestine illegally. And one of the major areas that they are occupying right now is Golan Heights. And that area is not on Obama's itinerary. He's not going into Golan Heights. I'm not exactly sure where he's going to be visiting in Israel, but I'm sure that it's going to paint a really pretty picture of Israel, because they are just our favorite nation at this point. So right now at this point, Israel holds about 90% of Palestinian territory that they have taken by force. And they have been doing this through a slow process of eviction and bulldozing and terrorizing Palestinians. And the only footage that you see is the Palestinians fighting back with rocks against a military that is getting most of their stockpiles from us. And the dialogue that is always portrayed through our mass media of distraction is the idea that the Palestinians are somehow provoking the Israelites to retaliate in self-defense, when in fact it's completely bullshit, and it is the other way around. These people are trying to defend themselves because they're losing everything. They're being cut off from food. They're being cut off from water. They're being cut off from anything that will allow them to survive. And it's really sick, and it's really sad. And less than a month ago, Israel awarded a license to a U.S. energy firm. Now here's where it gets really interesting. All right, so we've been protesting about the tar sands pipeline. We're really pissed off at the U.S. because they are basically being the middleman to profit from crude oil. Well, the new thing that's going on is this new company called Genie Energy, which is based out of New Jersey. Funny thing is, they're looking to drill in the Golan Heights area. Now what this means is Golan Heights is being illegally occupied by Israel. That violates international law. According to the Hague Convention, it forbids pillaging of any area, even if it is taken over by military force. All right, you're not allowed to extract natural resources from an area. Really, any resources from an area. You cannot take this stuff by assault. It's completely forbidden. So basically, that's what Genie Energy wants to do. They want to go into Golan Heights. They want to drill, baby, drill. And this could cause a huge lawsuit with any of the corporations who benefit or partner with Genie Energy. But here's the funny thing. New Jersey-based corporation, right? The head of this corporation is former Israeli Minister of Infrastructure, Efi Eitan, and he lives in one of the illegal settlements in Golan Heights. So this is, if you guys didn't watch the episode about Israel versus Palestine, the illegal settlements are basically these gated communities that Israel built on the Palestinian land. And, it's like, it's Jews only, it's exclusive, it's posh, and it's all in the name of the slow genocide of Palestine. So if that isn't bad enough, Dick Cheney is the advisor. So there he is again, he advised George Bush on how to commit genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now he's right there helping Genie Energy pillage the occupied territory. Just never ends, Dick, just never ends. Oh, and Rupert Murdoch is a shareholder, of course. So we've got the Holy Trinity there, guys. You've got this former Minister of Infrastructure in Israel. You've got Dick Cheney, the advisor, and you've got Rupert Murdoch as one of the big shareholders. This shit is so disgusting, but none of it surprises me whatsoever. So Obama is in a tough spot now because of this, all right? So he's already got a few things on the table, right? Remember those tough decisions that he said he was going to have to make in his presidency? Well, here's a few. So not only does he have to decide whether or not he lets the KXL pipeline go through next month, but now he's got to decide, okay, do I stop Genie from drilling and risk the pro-Israel backlash, because, we have to stay all buddy-buddy with Israel, or do we ignore Genie and potentially cause huge lawsuits with all these corporations that are going to try to benefit off of this drilling? Not to mention the violation of human rights, or international law, none of that mumbo-jumbo. So, tough position, Obama. I'd almost feel sorry for you, except you're totally perpetuating all of this. So, screw you, man. And the U.S. subsidizes, of course, Israel's exploitation of Palestine. The aid to the Palestinian Authority lets Israel pay very little for its colonization, and it basically lets them just reap profits from the industry and the products in Golan. So there's a few industries that happen in Golan Heights, like there's a wine industry, there is all of the beauty products from the Dead Sea. So my suggestion is if you buy any products from the Dead Sea, boycott them. It's a small way that you can make your statement. It's not very much, but it is one of the ways that we can try to protest our distaste with the relationship with Israel. So basically, they hijacked the industries there, and they're profiting from them. So it's just more ways of pillaging. And the UN ain't going to do nothing about it. So you can forget about hoping that international law is going to get tried on this one. So what else? The thing with Israel is that there's a religious extremist undertone to all of this. There is the Zionist movement, the idea of creating Jerusalem as the homeland exclusively for Jews. That means denying Christians, Muslims, people of any other faith that identify with Jerusalem as a holy place for them to worship and to have sanctuary or asylum. That is going to be reserved just for Jews. That's one of the Zionists' agenda. Besides the conspiracy theory that they are also trying to create a new world order. But that's there's a lot of fun stuff in there. And I think I might have to dedicate an entire rant just to explaining what Zionism actually is and how the U.S. is involved and what corporations support it. So that's a conversation for another day. But religious extremists are a form of terrorism. Putting the fear of God in people is a form of terrorism to me. It's an easy way to manipulate vulnerable minds and hearts and to get people to do things that they would not willingly do otherwise. So the religious extreme view that Jews own the right to Jerusalem, or the religious extreme view that we see in this country with, say, Westboro Baptist Church, who people have tried to deem as a hate group, even though they're covered under the First Amendment. You could say the same for the neoconservatives that took over the presidency for 2 terms, with the Bush administration. These are people that are very tightly connected to their faith, and Christianity in particular has governed presidencies for years. And John F. Kennedy himself, being a Protestant, pointed out that there was a shift happening towards this Catholic dictator-like mentality as to how to write legislation and how to determine who's got rights in this country and who doesn't. And of course, we have been feeling as activists fighting for the gay community, for women's rights, for LGBT, that we continue to take 1 step forward and 2 steps back because our country is actually run by people that are racist and sexist and anti-gay. And so until we can take religion and this outdated book of stories out of the equation, it's not going to change, and we're not going to see the legislation that actually makes people equal. And that is what fuels a lot of this racism, is the idea that just as Nazi Germany wanted to expel a specific group and purify the human race in their image, we seem to think that if we expel Islam and we somehow wipe out anyone who is deemed a radical extremist from the Middle East, that we will somehow have peace and that Christianity can blossom in the form of democracy. And it's all just a big fat lie. And the fact is, the actual teachings of Islam are much more peaceful and much more in tune with the idea of doing unto others as you would have done unto you. The same kind of principle that's in the Bible, that is in most teachings. These are universal truths. However, because they look different, they speak differently, and that their country has operated in a way where the women are cloaked and they have different customs, there is a blatant racism against that, and it comes from a complete lack of understanding. And unfortunately, a lot of the soldiers that went and fought in Iraq and Afghanistan carried that racism with them, as Mike in his testimony revealed, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. And I definitely encourage you guys to watch that whole speech, because this guy was really brave to say the things that he said. And who knows if we could see a Nuremberg Charter Part 2 with soldiers who followed orders and killed people mercilessly. I understand that people are really upset and they are grieving for what they've done. However, all we are doing is breeding hatred in these nations, and they are going to want justice. They are going to want to see something happen, some kind of resolve. And it's hard to say whether or not that's going to happen or not. So let's talk about a few other things. Drones. Drones is a big one. So you guys mostly know about drones, right? But here's a few interesting statistics. So this is one of the ways that the U.S. is terrorizing the world, right? We've got drones flying in the U.S., we've got drones flying overseas. An unmanned vehicle, this little plane in the sky that could drop a missile or a bomb on you at a moment's notice. Who knows? When there's no guy in the cockpit, there's really no way to hold it accountable. There's no way to know what it's thinking or doing, because there's some guy with a joystick miles and miles away calling the shots. In Pakistan alone, between June of 2004 and September of 2012, there were about 474 to 880 civilian casualties. And it's really hard to report the casualties because a lot of these drone programs are completely shrouded in mystery. And it shouldn't come as any surprise that the CIA programs are not going to reveal any of that information. You can get information about the DoD overt programs, but anything that is CIA covert, you can just forget it. You can't find it. This has had really bad implications for how Pakistan views us. We have been bombing them, terrorizing them, making people afraid to leave their homes. And what is the result of that? 74% of Pakistan is considered U.S. the enemy. Does it surprise you? I mean, if another country came here and started, having drones going overhead like a bunch of vultures and randomly bombing weddings and other large groups and trying to target supposed terrorists, I would hate them too. I would consider them an enemy, and I would fight back, sure as hell. So I sympathize with the hatred that's felt for this country. But I think the difference is I don't believe that the civilians in these nations that we are terrorizing believe that the civilians here are terrorists. I think they can make the distinction that it is in fact our government and our government's foreign policies that are the terrorist act and that are the root of the problem. And that is why perhaps that the targets have been what they are. I don't think it's any coincidence that even if 9/11 was an inside job, that it would be the World Trade. That is the epitome of what this country represents. It's the epitome of greed. It's the epitome of our stance on what we are to the rest of the world. And it's this imperialistic attitude. And countries don't like that. And that is not something that everybody's on board with. And our version of democracy in this country is not what everybody else wants. And it's time that this country stopped imposing its own warped view of democracy on everybody else. It's time that if a country's going to have a civil war, let them have their own civil war. It's time we had a civil war in this country. That might be the only way that things start to get any better. But we know that when they're trying to disarm us and they're trying to suppress our view and they're labeling us domestic terrorists, that there may be little hope of any kind of democracy actually existing. But that's what's going on. There is a cool video that came out recently from Brave New Foundation. And basically they've been trying to do research about the drone strikes. And they've been trying to depict the environment and what it feels like to live in this country where you're surrounded by drone activity all the time. So there have been about 3,300 drone strikes that they know of. The number could be bigger or smaller, but that's approximate. And about 176 of them have been children. And some of the symptoms of living with drones in your area are trauma, severe anxiety, psychological disorders, and this is one of the things that happens. We can't expect a country to embrace us and our interventions if all we're doing is creating more issues for them and for their women and for the children who grow up in this environment. We are breeding potentially new real terrorists. I mean, people who may just come over here and seek revenge. I mean, it's totally likely, but the idea that we are going there to get rid of terrorism and then we're actually breeding hatred, it's the most silly concept I've ever heard. It's absolutely disgusting. But that's what we do. So the idea that strikes make us safer here is completely ambiguous. These drones don't just bomb an area. These maim people, they incinerate people depending on what kind of missile capabilities they have. They leave bodies completely unrecognizable. So families are left with this problem of not even being able to bury their own. They can't find a body. So how horrible is that? and you can't just go on the air and say, oh, we apologize for accidentally bombing you and your children, and you don't have a body to bury. And they also have a secondary strike policy. So it's kind of like they drop the first bomb, and they drop a second one just for good measure. So when one goes off, the people in this area are prepared for that. It's like the aftershock of an earthquake. So this is terrifying, because you don't know where the second strike is going to come from. So you've already experienced the first, and this is what happens. So we are just creating more fearful people that have to live in this constant state of anxiety. And a lot of people that I've been watching in interviews, they're trying to distract from this fact. They're trying to distract from actually feeling what this is doing to other people. They're trying to say, well, you know, we need to know who they're targeting and who is actually on the drone strike list. And none of that matters. If you're sending an unmanned vehicle into the air, into another nation, and flying it over civilian residences, and you're just throwing bombs in the hope that they hit your target, who cares who you're trying to target? Because the fact is, drones are not precise. And that is one of the biggest lies that Obama has been doing, is going on TV and saying that drones are very precise, and they're actually not. They're not accurate, and that's just the bottom line. So if the president can get on TV and at least acknowledge the drones, but then completely twist the reality of what drones do, how much more can you really believe? How much more can you really believe that this guy is in it for your best interest? If you still think that he's there for any good, you're kidding yourself, and that's just the truth. So, what else? Oh, yes, I wanted to talk about Assad for a moment. But first, so one of the other drone strike areas that we're targeting is Yemen. A lot of drones have gone over Yemen. And Yemen is a country that's pretty much in poverty right now. Their oil production peaked in about 2011, and since then it has been on the decline. They're only producing about 300,000 barrels a day compared to the 450,000 barrels they were producing, and that was the source of most of their income. They're also running out of water, and the water reserves could run dry in the capital in the next 20 years. The reserves for oil are projected to run out within the next decade. And the only other aspect of their economy is agriculture, really. That's the other big thing, and if they lose their water, you can kiss that goodbye. And this is one of the countries that we're throwing drones over and bombing this community. So this is a community that is already suffering, where 1/3 of the country is malnourished, 45% of them live below the poverty line, some on less than $2 a day, a third of them are currently unemployed, and 40% of those unemployed are between the ages of 20 and 24. So a lot of parallels between what we're starting to see happen here, what we've seen happen in Europe. These countries are starving, and the UN doesn't seem to want to do anything about it. The UN just allows us to keep terrorizing and keep bombing. And Saudi Arabia used to be a place of employment for people in Yemen, where they could come over and get work. But because Yemen supported Saddam Hussein during the Gulf War, they cut them off in 1990 and no longer allowed any guest workers as a form of punishment. So Yemen's not doing so great, and we're not really helping them out in the way that we should be if we gave a shit. And that's how we terrorize Yemen. What else? So Obama visited Israel. We've gotten to that. And so America, a history of terrorism. I want to go back to Bin Laden real quick, because I think you guys can understand how we breed hatred. You might better understand Bin Laden in particular. This guy's gotten a really bad rap. I'm not saying he's a good guy by any means, but what you know about him, or the little that you know about him, is mostly fabricated. So basically, Bin Laden is somebody who was an Islamist militant. He was kind of on the fringe of the Islamic revolution, if you will. This was pre-Arab Spring. He was trying to encourage people to rise up in mass numbers and revolt against their oppressive governments and restore a nation of Islam that was more in the image he felt it was just more in his image. He was an Islamist extremist, and just as we have radical extremists in our country who want revolution, he was kind of the same way. But the idea that he was part of a solid network is actually really inaccurate. He was actually just part of a loose group of guys who all kind of felt the same way and all kind of took the Islamist movement to the extreme. And they all kind of did their own autonomous things. The thing about bin Laden was he had the money. He was able to fund and help other groups and other people just in whatever they wanted to do. And I think in his eyes, he was hoping to someday become a great leader in the Middle East and to help liberate people. I'm not saying the way he did it was the best, but Al-Qaeda was a fabrication, and that's what I'm going to get into. So at the time when bin Laden starts coming into the minds of Americans, this was actually pre-9/11. We had been working with the bin Laden family through the CIA for a long time. And he had no formal organization at that point that he had belonged to. So basically the U.S. invented one for him. And how they did this was through an informant. And that was basically what they needed to prosecute him. They wanted to create a new mafia-like group. They wanted to create an entity so that they could peg him as the head guy and then basically prosecute him for anything that this supposed organization did. So in January 2001, this is pre-9/11, mind you, in a Manhattan courtroom, they were trying 4 men for the USS Cole bombing that happened near Yemen, around the East Africa and Arabia area. So they decided during this trial that they were going to try to prosecute bin Laden as well. And he wasn't there for this, so they were going to prosecute him in his absence, just like they've done to mafia guys. But they needed some kind of evidence. So in order to get that evidence to directly link him to some kind of crime, they called upon an ex-associate of bin Laden. And this was like a war king kind of guy. He was a buddy of bin Laden's. Problem is the guy was on the run. The guy had stolen some money from bin Laden, so he was trying to hide. And in order for him to get some kind of witness protection, he basically worked with the U.S. government and testified and almost made the entire thing up. He basically told whatever the CIA wanted to hear in order to solidify their creation of this terrorist organization. His name was Jamal Al-Faldo, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names, but I believe it's Al-Faldo. And he was a Sudanese militant, and he worked with bin Laden in the mid-90s. He ends up in America after he's trying to flee because he owes bin Laden all this money. They take him as a key witness in this prosecution. They paid him a lot of money. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars in our taxpayer money, and most of his account was a lie. And basically what he did is he built this picture of Al-Qaeda. And this was this idea that they had this network, and there were all these sleeper cells, and this was all over the world that this was planted. And bin Laden was at the wheel of it all. He was there, switching the gears and basically plotting from his cave somewhere in the Middle East. So this was like the first major myth, and it was so successful because we so desperately wanted an organization to eventually, once 9/11 came, a few months later, we wanted somebody to blame. We wanted to know who did this to us and how could this happen, and are we in danger, or are we threatened? Like, oh my God. So we needed to somehow quiet the anger and the panic and the fear that the public was already starting to feel. Like, how could 3,000 people just die in one day? So that's what they did. So this had little relation to the actual truth, that he was actually just a loose-knit group of fringe militant guys who had their own vision, and they just wanted to see their own version of revolution. And most of them really had no interest in attacking the U.S. They really didn't see a point to attacking the U.S. In particular, they were originally a little bit intimidated when Obama became president. But they saw that there was really no point, because if they assassinated if they assassinated Obama, Vice President Biden, of course, would take over, and they felt that he was ill fit to be president, and that would cause more problems worldwide. So, whether it was plotted or not, the fact is it didn't happen, and that's one of the things, is that a lot of this was preemptive attempts to snuff out terrorism without any actual evidence. And the fact that Al-Qaeda itself was a name given to bin Laden and his loose group, he didn't even find out about it until after 9/11 had happened. He didn't even know that this is what he was being called. And I think he went with it because he was amused. That's my personal opinion. I don't know what he was thinking. But I'm sure it was kind of amusing to know that the U.S. was projecting this entire story to the U.S. people. And very little of it was based on any actual facts. So I can imagine that would be kind of amusing. But who knows? We'll never know. He's buried in the ocean somewhere. So they try bin Laden, and they try these others, and this is what they use to prosecute. And what was really about to happen was this birth of a very, very powerful idea. And this was the idea to actually counteract the other idea. The idea of Islamic extremism versus the idea of phantom terrorism. And these are the two ideas that have been butting heads and going up against each other since the attack on 9/11. And ideas are very hard to get rid of. The idea of you can't kill an idea whose time has come. Well, the U.S. realized that this was a very good way to keep this going. So basically, the devastating act of 9/11 just kind of gave them the green light and allowed us to go forth with enough conviction and enough support to let all of this happen. And we stood by and let it happen. And whether you can say, oh, but we were afraid, we were worried it would happen again. And well, the fact that over a decade later, only half of the country, apparently according to these polls, believes that the Iraq War was not worth fighting. We got a ways to go. I mean, the Republicans are still hell-bent on being loyal to George Bush's regime. It's sick. It's absolutely sick. There is too much evidence to not support this war. There is too much evidence to not support the government. There is enough evidence to say that all of this was blown way out of proportion. Bin Laden was also not the originator of the plane hijacker plot. That was actually a different guy. His name was Khaled Sheikh Mohammed, and he was another Islamic militant. And he came to bin Laden simply for money and volunteers. So basically came to the guy and says, hey, I want to attack the U.S. and can you give me some funding and stuff? And I can imagine, I don't know how much of a sense of humor bin Laden had, but yeah, sure, I'll give you some money. So maybe indirectly he assisted in the attack of 9/11, but the government completely knew about it and did nothing to stop it. And all you have to do is look at Bush's face the moment he is read the news into his ear, and you can tell that something's wrong, very wrong. But basically, in the wake of the attack, this is how we wove the web of Al-Qaeda. It was the perfect excuse. It was the perfect way to do it. And it's interesting because the last time that the people that were in the Bush administration, like Cheney and Rumsfeld, the last time they were in an administration like this together was during the Reagan years. And they basically used the same formula to form the terrorist scare that they did to form the Red Scare. They totally embellished and blew up the concept of communism. They had people scared out of their minds that communists were lurking around every corner. Anybody who spoke out against their government was considered a communist, yada, yada, yada. Sound familiar? It's the same thing. History does repeat itself, and all you have to do is learn your history to really know this is nothing new, this is nothing surprising. And the big thing that we need to understand is while George Bush claimed that this was a war between good and evil, it's actually a religious war. And it's a religious war that has been waging in the Middle East for a long, long time over the status of Jerusalem and over the status of what government religion is incorporated. So if you're living in a country with multiple religions and the government is using one particular religion to rule, that often leads to a lot of conflict. People don't feel represented. People don't feel that their government is for the people, because the people encompass a lot of different views, and that's why obviously having Christian leaders is very much against the whole separation of church and state thing. And that's what's happening. What's happening to us is happening in a lot of other places, and we have to start seeing the connection between what we're suffering with in the U.S., which isn't as bad yet, but what other people are suffering with as well on a higher, more extreme level. And so basically we've got the Soviets all over again, this idea of terror and good and evil. So moving right along, there was also the Northern Alliance I had mentioned. The Northern Alliance, they got paid over $1 million for helping us catch bin Laden and find terrorists. And the British also joined in on this fight, and they didn't catch anybody because they weren't there, because we made them up. So a lot of money spent on a wild goose chase that really didn't do anything. Didn't do anything good for us. Didn't do anything good for Afghanistan and Iraq, who now have to try to pick up the pieces from the rubble that we have left behind. So basically, what we're doing is, as we continue to chase this phantom, we're missing out on the real threat, which we're creating. We're creating the hatred. We're creating a potential new threat, and this is what could really, really come to bite us in the ass later on, especially our partnership with Israel. This could get really, really hairy. So I want to bring up some of these new laws that are trying to get introduced and passed in the Senate. Really, really not anything that I didn't know per se, but the fact that it's getting put on paper and becoming official just kind of solidifies how really just kind of screwed up our relationship with Israel is. So aside from what they're doing to Palestine, there are two new bills that are being introduced. There's H.R. 938 and there's S.R. 65, which haven't gone through yet, but they probably will. So H.R. 38 is the United States Israel Strategic Partnership Act of 2013. And basically it's just a declaration of our foreign policy with Israel, that they are our best friend and they are our favorite nation in the world. And how they established that lovely buddy-buddy best friend relationship is we extend through this bill the time frame and the scope of assistance into for info sharing programs. So basically, Israel can have anything that we have. We've extended this into Tel Aviv before, but this kind of just says, hey, we got military stockpiles. Help yourselves, guys. Just have whatever you want. We also have new reporting requirements according to this bill. So this is, again, a manipulation of the media. Basically says that any reporting that comes out of the White House or any other departments from our government end, it has to portray Israel in the positive light that their programs are moving forward. So again, not to shed any light on real truth, just keep it that way and everything will be copacetic. Israel is also allowed to re-export any technology that they get from us. So they can profit off of anything we make, which they were kind of already stealing it anyway, but this just kind of makes it official. Like, okay, yeah, you guys can have whatever you want. And it mandates that the U.S. should provide assistance upon request by the government of Israel for the procurement and enhancement of the systems, which refers to their missile defense systems. They're basically beefing up their nukes, and they want our full support on that. Is that an international law violation again? Damn. This just never ends. SR 65. This is just our obligation to do whatever Israel tells us to do when it comes to Iran. If Israel decides to go to war with Iran in self-defense, we are obligated to support them. And this is diplomatically, monetarily, and militarily. So we basically are there for the long haul whatever Israel decides to do. This is a really scary thing. I mean, I understand we have allies, but just because another country's got beef doesn't necessarily mean we have to intervene. If the country doesn't have beef with us, we can help that country But this is the idea of that we are obligated. So no matter what they're going to war for, in claiming self-defense, we have to assist. So that's where we're at. And there's another area where we terrorize, which is just, I'm jumping all over the place. I hope you guys can follow me. It's kind of hard because I feel like to understand how the U.S. terrorizes, it is all happening simultaneously and randomly and without any kind of common sense thought to what they're doing may be utterly and completely wrong and immoral. But that's U.S. for you. So John Kerry was recently in Rome, and John Kerry is somebody that I actually voted for when he went up against George Bush, and I'm really just disappointed in this guy. But I guess I'm disappointed in most politicians when you wake up to the reality that they're all a bunch of liars. But he was in Rome talking about his support for Syria, and right now we are supporting the Syrian National Coalition. So these are the people that are trying to rise up against their oppressive government. Right now in Syria, there have been about 4 million people that have been displaced, either internally or have left the country to get away from the violence. And the problem is, while we are supporting the attempt for the people to rise up against their oppressive government, we are not really giving them what they need. We are now aiding them with an extra 60 million on top of the 50 million that we've already given them. But this is only non-lethal direct support. So basically what John Kerry is saying is, we're going to help you guys so that you can, provide medical attention, that you can make sure there are schools and all the infrastructure to keep a society, community going, manages to stay in place while you guys fight. The problem is they are seriously outnumbered and outgunned. And if you're going to fight a revolution against an oppressive government regime, you're probably going to need some weapons. And that is what the Syrian rebels continue to ask for, is that they need weapons to defeat this regime, and all they are going to do is continue to fight a battle they can't win, which is going to lead to more unnecessary bloodshed and terror within the country. Now, I don't agree with war and guns, but if you're having a goddamn revolution, it's very hard to have a peaceful one. And what it comes down to is what they're going up against, aircraft, tanks. You need to be armed. You need to be able to defend your people and defend innocent civilians who are caught in the crossfire. But that's not what we're doing, and Assad is refusing to step down at this point. And it's just really sad, because Assad took a lot of money from the U.S. To help the war on terrorism. He received at least $1 million to say that he was on board with the war on terrorism. Basically, anybody around the world that said, "Oh yeah, we're going to fight that war on terror," got money from us. So lots of money squandered. And this is where we're at. So, where else am I at? Just a few other ways that we're terrorizing people before I get to my closing statements of this rant. The war with drugs I had mentioned, and that is obviously the criminalization and imprisonment of families in concentration camps. We have the corporatocracy, which is taking over every natural resource, poisoning our food, water, and air. We've got the two-party puppet politics, which continue to mislead us and distract us and bicker with each other over social issues when they actually have almost identical foreign policies. The suppression and oppression of the Occupy movement is an example of how the U.S. government has terrorized us, and they turn it around and call us terrorists. There's also the continuous operation of Guantanamo Bay, where we torture and kill people, and we have detained hundreds of people in the name of this war on terror. No one has been convicted to actually being a terrorist or being affiliated with a terrorist group. There have only been 3 that were considered potentially terrorist-like, and it was only because they were fundraising and had Islamist literature. That's it. So, war on terror, big fat goose egg. Besides killing bin Laden, there was really nothing else that we found. So, mission accomplished? Not quite. And we're still technically at war with North Korea. There's a lot of things brewing around in North Korea. I might have to dedicate a rant just to that because it's a complicated history, and a lot of people don't understand what's going on in North Korea. But apparently Dennis Rodman does. You didn't notice that Dennis Rodman went to North Korea, and apparently he's real like buddy with the guy. Apparently he's a big basketball fan. He loves the Bulls. Kind of funny, weird. And then there is our bombing. So we're bombing Pakistan, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Palestine, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. We've almost got the entire Middle East covered. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, God, this is exhausting, you know? So, who are the real terrorists? The real terrorists are us. And if you continue to pay taxes, I believe you're funding terrorism. And you don't have to pay taxes. That's one of the big myths in our country. Because if you knew that, you probably wouldn't pay taxes. But the 16th Amendment was never properly ratified. So that makes it technically inaccurate, irrelevant, obsolete, doesn't matter. People are under the impression that it does. It's one of those little big fat lies that we're told. But IRS agents themselves have quit their job, and they have actually stopped paying taxes and refused to even file tax returns as a result of finding this out for themselves. So if you don't believe me, you can probably go talk to any ex-IRS agent who found that out. So, you know, in trying to end my future rants with a positive solution, before we get to Charlie, because yes, we're going to get to Charlie. Charlie's still going to come on the air and ask some questions. But yeah, that's the only thing I can really offer, because you can keep speaking out about it, you can keep advocating for a lack of participation in this government, and you cannot fund terrorism by not paying taxes. And you don't have to, and you can argue your way, even if they try to take you to court, and trust me, there are lots of IRS agents who are doing it. I do not pay taxes either, and it's not because I'm a lazy, jobless bum, it's because I don't believe in funding war. So, thank you guys for hearing me out on my rant, and now I think we're going to get Charlie in here somewhere to hang out with me a little bit. So, yeah, do we have him on camera? Have it? I'll come over here a little bit.
Hey, everybody. So, Lauren, your legs must be tired because you covered so much ground tonight.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And yet you're all over the place?
I am all over the place.
You know, I mean, this whole concept of Al-Qaeda not being a terrorist group. I mean, that's kind of like blows my mind because that's not what I've heard. Al-Qaeda is the most evil terrorist group to ever hit the face of the earth. And that's what I've been told. That's what every time you turn on the TV, it's Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda. There's a boogeyman. They're not that?
Well, the thing is, no.
Or they're just not that organized. They're just really not much to talk about at all, really. I'd equate what Bin Laden and his small group was to like any really radical extreme group in this country, like say, you know, a really violent offshoot of like anarchist black blockers or something. That's kind of the closest thing I can associate. Well, you know, just to stop you for a second there, but I mean, if you're going to do that, then let's be honest, that's a lot of talk, a lot of ideas. People are angry, but they're not really willing to do much of anything. It's not that they're not willing, but they just don't. Nothing really comes of it because people are angry. It's unfocused anger. It's frustration. It's rage. But they stop short when it comes to the point of hurting innocent people. When innocent people are going to get hurt, when you know people who are blameless are going to get fucked up, that's where they say, I can't do this. Mm-hmm. Is that really where that lies? Is it across the line? Does it tie into the whole religious aspect?
It does. I mean, I think that that Bin Laden is not somebody I'm looking for people to sympathize with
to any extent. The guy was definitely off his rocker and a little nuts. And he was considered in the Islamic world on the fringe.
He was a fundamentalist, though. He was a fervent believer in fundamentalist Islam.
I believe so. I mean, I don't know exactly what he thought because I haven't been able to read the documents that he's written. There's a book, apparently, of how he viewed what he believed this Islamist movement was supposed to go towards.
Right.
But he did see people suffering, and he saw how the U.S. just was this hostile takeover.
Exasperating, making the situation worse.
Yes, and he just kind of felt like the West needs to stay over there and stop corrupting our people, stop making our people selfish. They're losing. I mean, people are losing their values to the West. And they felt that the West was a corrupt entity.
Right.
And so they just wanted to have it out, and so that they could have their revolution and get rid of the bad dictators or whoever, and that he could be, viewed as this great liberator and this person who helped save Islam. And I think that's how he looked at it. And
you think was there an ego aspect to it?
Oh, totally. The thing is, what's funny that people don't know about him was that he wasn't a very good speaker. But that he worked on that, and he tried.
He was an imposing figure. I mean, the guy was huge.
He's very tall,
6'6".
Yeah,
that's a huge person.
But when he went out into public, he knew that there was that the image was important. So, like, if he knew he was going to go out into public, he would hire a bunch of guys to show up with their own weapons and just walk with him.
Right.
So when people saw him, they were like, "Who is that guy? He's got all this protection."
He called rent a posse, really?
He rented a posse, yes. He rented a posse.
Wow, no kidding. That's incredible.
So, and really he was just a dude who lived a very sedentary life.
He created his own legends, in other words. In other words, he really never was any of that.
Yeah,
in a number of ways. I mean, in a really significant way, the person that was represented, this high muckety-muck of Al-Qaeda, this man who commanded thousands, who had sleeper cells, the equivalent of a network that the CIA could only dream of. And this is what was represented to us in the media. That, hey, he had these sleeper cells all over the United States, that there were these terrorists who were ready to wake up and set off dirty bombs and devastate train stations and release sarin and poison our water supplies and destroy our reservoirs and blow up dams and all of these things that were told. This was a guy who had to hire his own gunmen to stand around, or who had to hire an outside gunman to stand around and make him look bad. That's who this really was.
Yeah. He literally had a few guys that were, they were all kind of a loose-knit group that they all kind of shared the same view, and he had some money. So
he was a spoiled rich kid.
Yeah.
With delusions of grandeur.
Yes, exactly. And we've had plenty of those in our history. And what's funny about dirty bombs, because the fact that you mentioned dirty bombs, I learned today, there was this idea that dirty bombs, if they went off, they would expel all of this toxic radiation, and the people would die.
Well, you'd have to have huge amounts of radioactive material. I mean, to the point where my box truck wouldn't contain enough radioactive material to be spread across an entire city.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the amount of explosive that you would need to do that would be on the verge of having a hydrogen bomb.
Yeah, but that's the misconception. They just hear bomb and...
A truck bomb will only go across a few hundred yards. It just isn't that effective. It was never realistic. And here we were, driving into New York City in 2001, 2002, where the NYPD were like waving around Geiger counters, like they were going to stop a box truck.
Yeah, it's been all. That's the thing, is because people were so afraid. They didn't question all of these inconsistencies and terms that were coming out, and because we're not a country that is encouraged to question our government, we just took everything at face value.
Have we lived a lie the past 12 years?
Pretty much. Pretty much, and it's horrible and it's taken me watching a few documentaries and really reading some of the testimonies from people to say, oh my God, this is not only a huge lie, but a lot of the 9/11 Commission is not even covering what happened. There's all of this just mumbo jumbo, and ex-CIA agents are coming out and saying, yeah, we made it up.
But our police actions, as it were, in the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East has been widely regarded for many years as the powder keg.
Mm-hmm.
Since World War II, or maybe even before that, it was regarded as the powder keg, the end of the world area. That should war erupt in the Middle East, it'll be the end of everything.
It's definitely been.
This was widely regarded as that, and when we went into Iraq, to find the weapons of mass destruction, the really dangerous things that Saddam Hussein had. You remember those, right?
Yeah.
well, we
Saddam
went in there.
Hussein was not linked to Al Qaeda, by the way. He wasn't.
Yes, he was.
He
was
went.
buddies. They
Shrub
also like text messages.
Shrub was just trying to finish what good old Daddy didn't finish. That's all that was. He was just like, no, Daddy, I'm going to go get him.
That's got to be a simplistic way of looking at things. That can't be right. That can't be right. We went in there to restore democracy. That's what we were told. We were told that this guy is dangerous, that his Scud missiles were going to devastate Israel.
It's so funny because the civilians...
And we need to protect Israel, remember?
Yes.
It's extremely important because we don't have enough military bases in the Middle East. I mean, we only have 58.
More bases, more backup.
We have 58 military bases in the Middle East, don't we?
How many? 58?
I think so.
I think it's about that. You know what's funny, too, is that we have 58 military bases, and that's almost how many countries that the government claimed had sleeper cells. Weird how these numbers are always so close. And how easily
they're
it is
probably
to
just copying from one column to another.
Probably. Copy and paste. Yeah, it's crazy because to realize that your government duped you into sending your sons and daughters into an unjust war.
But could we have this all wrong? I mean, is it possible that we're finding information and we're digging up information from a bunch of different sources, and is it possible that we're wrong? That this really was something critical that we needed to do. I mean, what would have happened had we not invaded?
Well, I guess I could give the example of what happened in. There was another bombing that happened in, was it Argentina? I think it was considered a terrorist bombing. But the government did not take the same kind of precautions that they took against us. I mean, if you're fighting terror, why so severely take our civil liberties away? Why make us suffer? Why did we have to pay the price for fighting terror?
Well, any one of us could be carrying a dirty bomb. That's why they make us take our shoes off.
But that's what makes me feel like it's suspicious. Because I don't believe it's okay that when the public has already suffered enough in the wake of 9/11 to then take away all of our rights and make us subject to surveillance and illegal searches and make us suspicious of our neighbors. I mean, we're further dividing our own country. And I don't know.
You make it sound like it's a plot, Laura.
Am I?
Is it really a plot? But I mean, is it possible that this is just idiocy?
It is possible. The country's run by lunatics, so it's very, very possible that this is just idiotic.
Because, I mean, you can look at it from one aspect, where, like you mentioned Alex Jones earlier, right? Alex Jones is like a lightning rod. Because there's some people who fervently believe that, if he's not a holy person, at the very least, he knows the deal. He knows what's going on, and he's got his finger on the pulse of the hot button issues. He's got it figured out. And then there's other people who, to put it kindly, think he's a little bit touched.
Mm. Definitely, and he comes off that way.
And, you know, oftentimes there's a middle ground in between someone who's completely out of their mind, should be wearing a tinfoil hat and wearing some comfortable padded clothing, and reality, and then there's the rest of the story. So oftentimes things lie in the middle.
I mean, I think that this came down to profit. I think what the ex Iraqi soldier talks about is that, you know, this was all for profit. I think that the U.S. was looking at their position globally, and
that's a very cynical way to look at things.
I'm a bit of a cynic at this point. But you know, like, because war is profitable. It's very profitable, and
you know, let's be honest. It has to be profitable for ammunition makers. I mean, they can't lose a thing when there's a war going on because, well, that's when their product is most in demand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be profitable for any number of industries.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to take an idealistic stand and say everyone hates war, but if you own an ammunition company, it stands to reason that you're going to be at least like, oh, Jesus, it's horrible. Yeah, I'll fill an order.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's certainly not as though the companies are known for making moral stands and saying, I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah.
Publicly owned companies, I mean, by all rights, legally, they couldn't possibly refuse something like that. But, you know, by their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, they'd have to fill that order.
Exactly.
Even if they morally opposed it.
Well, that is the position that so many people are in, is that they are having to choose between continuing to have a job or a business and their morality. And, you know, being in the ammunitions business by its very nature is not going to be very moral if, you know, these wars are fought for nothing. And that's going to be, and most wars are fought for nothing.
Well, that brings up a, you know, even deeper philosophical detail. You know, I mean, do you have a right to stand on your morality?
I think you do have a right. I think you have an obligation.
I mean, can you be fired for making a moral stand and saying, this is wrong, we need to reevaluate this?
Well, yeah, people do get fired for standing up for their morality.
Shouldn't they have protection?
Totally. I think so.
I mean, I think that's an important thing that may be lacking in our society. Is protection for people who have real moral objections.
Well, you could say that.
Not based upon, you know, fairy tales from 3,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But real moral objections where they're saying, this is hurting someone. This is hurting someone now. This is hurting someone I can see. This is wrong.
Well, that's exactly what soldiers coming back from these wars are experiencing, is they thought they were going out there to actually get rid of a real enemy. And they discovered that they were the enemy and they were just terrorizing people.
Well,
and
they were duped.
They were totally duped, and now they're living with the reality of that betrayal. And you know, Bradley Manning is again a perfect example of somebody who felt it was their oath and their moral duty to report war crimes and then realized, oh wait, but you can't report war crimes on the U.S., you know, and
right, war crimes only apply to other countries.
Exactly, and I think that is a big flaw that is coming out in the oath itself.
Well, do you think that's why they haven't prosecuted him? I mean, it's been 1,000-something days he's been in jail now.
Since 9/11, the idea of everything being a threat to national security has been so overly used and exhausted, and that's exactly what they do. They felt that what he did, releasing this information, was a threat to national security, and considered an act of treason, that he betrayed the confidence of the fact that he had these classified materials in his view and access.
If it was a war crime, and you know, I'll be honest, I've watched the videos, and you know, I watched the one video of the helicopter with the flight crew. I listened to the audio when they were shooting down journalists and hunting them down and laughing about it. And, well, I don't horrify easily. really upset. I was crying.
It's sick. It's really sick.
And how else would you define that other than as a war crime? Like I said, I don't modify easily.
Yeah, I mean,
things that will make me
crime,
upset is this is a real short list of things that would get me that upset. Where I'd sit there and say, "Oh my God!" I can kick puppies. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, it's horrific, and I can't imagine having been in that position and having access to all of this horrific material and feeling like, if I don't do something, I know that these other trigger-happy rednecks around me, as Bradley Manning said, didn't think that they were going to do anything, so the obligation fell on one individual to make a choice, and that was whether to go down with the ship and face being put away or executed to get this out.
This also begs another question, because when you think about those words that just came out of your mouth, is why is he the only one? Is he the only one
Not the
in
only
our
one.
country with a conscience? Is he?
No.
Is he the only one who has access to that information? Who stuttered at this? Who said, "This is wrong"? What happened to the rest of them? Did no one else say anything? Did no one else watch those videos? Was no one on the flight crew in that helicopter who said, "Guys, the fuck is the matter with you"?
That is,
where have we lost our minds to think that this sort of thing has become okay?
I think it's been a systematic and deliberate attempt to numb us as a society, to embed racist thoughts in us as a society, to let our own ignorance be a weapon that they use against us, and I think it's just a lack of understanding. And people that have that misdirected anger, like you were talking about, I would say that those helicopter pilots and people that were shooting down a journalist, major psychological issues, whether that happened in the war or not, or prior. It is bad, and people do have a conscience, but it's like they are either too afraid to let it be their guide, like Jiminy Cricket would say, or they're just so beat down from everything that our society does to us, whether it is poison our food and water and air, bombard us with mindless TV, mislead us in the media.
This is just confusion.
I think people are just extremely lost. They're extremely lost, and people don't know what's up or down anymore, and I see a ton of just really sad, apathetic youth, and that is the most disturbing thing. And the Army, when they recruit, they target kids who feel they have no other choice, they feel they have no other options. They go into poor communities, they look for people that they can easily manipulate and mold. And that has major psychological implications, not just, even before they get on the battlefield. But to try to wrap my head around why they would gun down journalists like that, it is really hard to fathom. It's really hard because I have a conscience and it nags me all day. I can't let it go, and people think I'm crazy for talking the way I do, but I refuse to let my conscience go silent, because that's the day I might as well die, because I feel like we're walking among zombies, but I don't know what it's going to take, and I always ask this, like, what is it going to take for people to wake up? I mean, yeah, I know it's hard to hear this stuff, that we lived a lie, and we believed we were fighting a just war, but now what?
Thinking people have started waking up. The majority of people tend not to be thinking people. They're just kind of doing what they're doing, and they're thinking of the next vacation, next.
They're on the hamster wheel.
Yeah, you're doing your thing. You don't want to really hear about things. And when it hits home, when they lose a job, when something happens, that's when they wake up.
Yeah. I've been saying
hopefully it's not too late, but that's when people say, all of a sudden it hits them smack between the eyes and they say, "Oh my God, what the hell's going on?"
They need to be directly affected.
But we need to. This is why getting our message out is so critical, because it's kind of like you're whispering in their ear, and you're setting that trigger for when the shit hits the fan, and they get smacked in the face with reality. They know why. Because they've been told.
Exactly.
They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to see it. They didn't want to know anything about it. But when they're confronted with the reality of it, they really know the answer. We told them.
I hope.
That's where it is. And maybe they wake the fuck up.
Maybe they will, Charlie. And in the meantime, all of us got to stick together. And that's the most important thing, guys. So, once again, in sticking together, definitely follow us on our Twitter so you guys can hear more about all the crazy stuff we're discovering and all the things that our conscience just won't let us forget about. So that is at JAK_NLAUREN on Twitter. And guys, we were going back in the field this week. We are finally going to be streaming a live event. We are itching to get back out there and do something other than stream these little episodes, which is great. But we love being out there. So Sunday, which is, I believe, March 24th. March 24th around 3 p.m., we will be covering a march for Kamani Gray, who was a 16-year-old that was brutally murdered by the NYPD, and riots have been breaking out in Brooklyn as a result of the outrage in the community. So we will be covering that march, which will be leaving from 55th and Church, and we will be marching to the 67th Precinct. So please join us for that. We will be going live probably before 3 p.m., but the march is supposed to start at 3, so definitely tune in for that. We're super excited to be out there. That is this Sunday. Thank you guys so much for watching another episode, and we will see you next week or on Sunday. Thanks, guys.
Solidarity, yo.
Thank you so much for being here and being willing to talk a little bit.
Was that good, Jack? Cool.